This session is about money, and we just had quite an interesting conversation about how, money doesn't motivate everybody. And I certainly remember once working for a very commercial firm. It was a recruitment firm. I was good at it, but I wasn't. I didn't enjoy the heavy sort of sales technique. So while I was exceeding targets, that industry is about constantly increasing targets. And I remember hearing my boss's boss speaking about me on the phone and saying, "What motivates him?" And my boss said, "He's really good with the customers. He can really build up repeat custom." And the other boss had clearly said, "The only answer is money." And I realised I couldn't work for that person anymore, because I don't think that money is the only driving force. However, it does have a habit of making things a lot easier.
Yeah.
So this is a presentation about money which doesn't have any numbers in it. So all of the accountants and the business school people will think that it's a terrible presentation because there's no numbers in it. But I do think that actually talking about money without thinking about the numbers is good for entrepreneurs, because in my experience, personally and in working with other people, money tends to grow in your head and become a barrier to doing things and an incentive for not doing things. You tend to worry about the wrong aspects of money and allow the size of the money to kind of grow in your head, and actually you can start to get things happening, start to make a move with less amounts of money than you might think. And I think one of the opportunities which you have, which I don't have, in terms of the age of people, in terms of how you've been brought up, is that actually if you don't have a house, if you don't have a family, if you don't have a lot of personal debt, if you don't have a lot of outgoings, you've never had it so good to take quite a big risk in life. Leave it longer and you're going to have to ask your wife about this. You're going to have to ask your husband about this. You're going to have to think about the kids. You're going to have to think about the house. Do we have to sell the car? Do we have to sell both cars? As life goes on, you generate more and more responsibilities. So actually, youth and entrepreneurship fits really well. And people say experience is important, but you'll learn quickly. Let's just put it that way. So there's a couple of quotes here which I will tell you a couple of stories about. So this says, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is reality. And I'm going to talk about my first social enterprise leadership role. In many ways, the organisation was a success. That's why I was attracted to it. It was award-winning. One of the awards that it was the 6th fastest growing business in the city, and that was all businesses, not just social enterprises, but all businesses. It had grown very quickly over a short period of time. It was an opportunity for me to employ and manage over 50 people. It meant that I would be able to play with several £1 million. I was quite attracted to that. It had a big reputation. Everybody knew it. I didn't ask the question about what that reputation was, but everybody knew it. It was worrying, the competition, because it was big and it was doing things, and it was one of the agencies that was seen as being about change. So the competitors who were more comfortable, who wanted things to move at a slightly slower pace, they were worried about it being there. There were also very big expectations. You've grown big. You've got this big position, you've got influence, we expect something back from it. And within a few weeks, I realised that it was making pretty substantial losses just about everywhere. And that was hidden by this gloss of this big turnover. Lots of money going in and out, but it was losing money. And that meant that we were literally burning the cash that we had in the bank. And as each month went on, we had less and less and less and less and less. And I was scared. Very quickly, I became scared for the first time, because being scared is when you don't know what to do in any situation. I think that's, And anybody that says they're not scared of something has clearly never taken any risks in their life and actually pushed themselves to the limit of what they know they can do. And I was beyond my limit, and therefore I was scared. And I just didn't have any experience to draw on. I'd never even burned all my own money, let alone, other people's. And we immediately began to turn the organisation around, and I did use the things that I was good at. Some of the leadership skills and behaviours that I've got, I just fell on those, and I certainly didn't do it perfectly, and I learned a lot about what I'm not good at, and I've done things about that since then. But that group of people were synergised together to actually work harder than they'd ever harder and more intelligently for 3 months. And within 6 months, we turned the organisation around and started a new direction. We got to within a few hours of the end of that financial year, and it was make or break. We would either have enough money, or I would be writing letters to over 50 people saying you don't have a job. And I would be writing those letters knowing that I didn't have a job either. It wasn't something that you could really walk away from. You would have to literally close something down, and it would just fall apart around your ears. But it was yours. It was your job. And we had lost a lot of people. Some of the directors had resigned as soon as they found out. They tried to distance themselves from. So remember when I said yesterday about having that group of people around you that you can lean on when it goes wrong? Well, that's you personally, but also the business employs people at the very top to be there. But we reduced from, I think, 9 people who were all apparently very dedicated to what we were doing to 5, and only 3 of those really getting it, and 2 of them sort of turning up and kind of thinking, wow, this is exciting, but I don't really know what's going on. So it was a very, very intense period of time. And we did amazing things to get cash into the business, get costs out of the business quickly. I made some very harsh decisions and fast decisions, but we got that money in. But literally those checks were cashing hours before the end of that year, when the auditors would have said, we have to call in the administrators. You don't have enough money to meet the outgoings in the short term. You are insolvent. You don't have liquidity. You don't have enough cash. Okay? So all of that bravado about size had been about vanity. Look at us. Aren't we doing well? And everybody thought they were doing well. I had no profits, so I was insane. I did feel like I was going crazy at times, and nothing made sense. Nothing made sense. There was no profit in the business. So every time someone came to me and said, can we buy this? I'd say, what with? There's nothing to spend. So no, you can't have any more toilet roll. That's an insane suggestion because there's no profit. And cash, that really told me. The reality was ours. The reality was jobs. The reality was tens of pounds, hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds. Okay? And when I left that organisation, it had over £150,000 worth in cash that it could touch at any time. And that meant that actually it could cover its expenses for quite some period of time in the future if it ever needed to. And we did that by making profits and keeping some of them back, reducing costs, putting some sanity back into the business, and creating a new reality based on cash. An entrepreneur in debt is an entrepreneur in business. This word debt is going to mean more to you as an entrepreneur than it has done before. You will always be in debt in some form as an entrepreneur. And it's a good sign because it means you're really in business. Everything is working. If you're borrowing something from somewhere at some point, you must be working to the edge of your skin. You must be actually taking a risk. You must be actually following your vision before you know 100%. And that gap is the debt I'm talking about. You'll be borrowing something from someone all the time, including yourself. You might be borrowing time. You might be borrowing money. You might be taking energy. You will be drawing down more. The reason is that entrepreneurship is a doing word. It's a verb. It's not about waiting. You know, I do get discouraged when I see people who have a good idea and then they find lots of things to put in the way of them actually doing that thing and then say they're an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur will remove every single one of those obstacles to get to doing. I know I've said that the entrepreneur spends 70% of their time thinking, but that 10% action is not 10% action some of the time. You're always acting. You just have to, that's why in another debt, you're going to find more time than you're currently using to spend some time analysing things. So, for example, currently my social business in the UK doesn't pay me a salary, and it doesn't pay my business partner a salary, and we've been doing it over a year, and we don't envisage it paying us a salary for maybe another year. And an entrepreneur I was sat with having a coffee in the north part of Nicosia just a couple of weeks ago, he's on 2.5 years and he isn't on a salary either. Okay? So where is the money coming from? For him, he's borrowing money to supplement some of the things that he needs to keep in his life. A car and the petrol and things like that. I sold my car. Yet I travel all over the world. You don't need both. I'm borrowing from myself in a way because I've had to give quite a lot up. I've had to give up the ability to go out for a £200 meal and not think about it. Doesn't mean I can't go out for that meal, but it means I have to think about it. And I can't do it every week. I can't even do it every month. But I'm borrowing from myself. Okay, I'm not paying myself a salary. If I wanted to pay a salary, then maybe the company will be in debt. So I can make that decision if I want. I can put the company in debt so I can have a salary. But as an entrepreneur, you're always aware of exactly where the money is. So if I don't take a salary, then the company doesn't have to borrow. So actually I've reduced the debt, but there's still a debt there.
So what's the right kind of debt?
That's an interesting question. Depends who answers it. A bank will say that the debt you can pay back, plus some interest, please.
What does an entrepreneur answer to that?
I think my answer to that, I can't answer for all entrepreneurs, is a debt that makes sense. If you're confident that that debt makes sense, fine. Now, I've spent the previous session emphasising just how much time you should feed your brain before it makes that sort of decision. But if you feed your brain and you analyse the situation, you should have to have confidence in yourself that the decisions I'm making at that time are pretty sane.
There's a lot of questions about debtocracy lately, especially with...
What does that mean?
Okay, from what I realize is, from what I understand, okay, is putting people or entire countries in debt, okay, in order to make the rich people richer and the poor people poorer. So, how is an entrepreneur's debt? How does that influence the situation? How much part of it is, and how much it isn't?
Okay. Well, the first thing I would say is that to many entrepreneurs, that does not make sense. So what that debtocracy you were talking about, sort of over leveraging, borrowing on borrowing on borrowing, just so that someone else can borrow, doesn't make a lot of sense to most entrepreneurs because they wouldn't make that decision with their business or themselves.
They would have the right kind of debt, as we said.
What their debt would be is a bridge. Debt in business is a bridge between I'll have it and I don't have it now.
Okay.
Or if I do this, then I'll get something back. It's a form of investment, in decisions that you're making based on your judgment. And if you're asking other people to invest, that's why you produce so much information to actually convince them to take the risk in you.
Yeah.
Cyprus is somehow showcase that things can get wrong. Is it? And how things can get wrong? Is it based on judgments of people, based on...
I think it's when they stop
situation?
judging. I think it's when they stop judging, when they stop asking why. When we said before, that people go with the flow and think that the fundamentals, remember we talked about the fundamentals of business models, talked about the fundamentals of how some of these things work, when they think that everything is going well and the fundamentals must have changed somehow, and then they come crashing down when they realise they haven't.
Well, we can look at Cyprus and realise the things that go wrong Yes, I do. I mean, all the extravagant spending, all the exaggeration, okay, all the corruption, and people earning much more than they should, while other people, earn much less than they should.
See, I'll share my experiences.
It's a question of balance, maybe.
There's no debt as such in the business that I'm running, and I haven't borrowed any more money to do what I'm doing. To pay for that, because someone has to pay for that, I have reduced costs to very low. I've made a lot of sacrifices, given up on a lot of things, and I've asked people that don't want the money back to give me money, like a grant. I don't advise people to borrow money unless they think it's sane and unless they've actually done the work themselves to work out what, it's an investment. You should want to pay it back. But what I'm also saying is you will always be in debt in some way, because your time is also a hugely expensive commodity that you can't get back. So if you're putting a lot of time into something and you're not getting anything back from it, that's almost as bad as wasting money. So, and if you're constantly taking energy from yourself and not replenishing it, at some point that's going to damage your ability to perform. So you as an entrepreneur will define what debt means, but it doesn't have to be about money. But where it is about money, it needs to be where it makes sense, based on your own analysis and the fundamentals and things like that. And I think a lot of the debt that does exist in society doesn't make sense. It's based on imaginary information, not judgment. So you could argue that if the Cypriot government had actually done their more homework and doubted things a bit more, they wouldn't have put all the money where they put it. And if they'd have put so much faith in people and then believed that they then wouldn't, basically leave them high and dry. But, the very high expectations of a government. Entrepreneurs are allowed to make mistakes, so keep the amount of debt small. But, governments have inflated their debt with their inflated responsibility, and it's gone pop. Okay? So personally, as a person, I am a lot in debt. I paid for my master's degree, I paid for my bachelor's degree, and that sort of stuff. And actually, that is impeding me to be as free as I could be in my business, because I have those commitments. So that's one of the reasons why I've said if you're doing entrepreneurship, to do it young before you've got those commitments is a freedom I don't have. So, I'm encouraging you probably to take more risk younger, because it's actually an opportunity. You get second chances. Okay? But this is a really controversial topic, and it's why I put it up there, really. So anyway, I was just going to say that while the businesses that I have, two companies, one social business in the UK, which is a partnership, that they don't need debt in them because they are very lean. The costs are very, very tight and kept under control. And there's a lot of goodwill comes from both the directors in terms of not billing for things and, basically creating money from thin air. The venture that I want to start in Cyprus is such an ambitious venture that I have calculated that it will need money from somewhere as an injection. Yesterday we talked about change and needing a big enough push, a big enough imperative to push through the resistance and keep going all the way through. And I can't do this latest venture, on the cheap. It doesn't mean I'm going to pay myself a big salary or employ lots of people, but it can't be having all the conversations it will need to have with people, empathizing with all its stakeholders, having those conversations, building its network, and have to spend half of its time finding money to keep ends meet. So it needs to have a bigger injection of cash up front from somewhere, maybe a grant, probably not a loan, because even my own figures don't say that you could actually pay that back. So it all depends on the type of business that you're creating. But if your analysis is rich and sound, then even these very big decisions are manageable, and you should take the decision as an entrepreneur. This is the third one. When you are an entrepreneur, you are unemployed tomorrow. Okay? An interesting concept. This is what I mean. I was having a conversation with an entrepreneur, and we were debating whether or not we were really employed, because neither of us have a salary. And to some people will say to you, well, I'm working at the local supermarket, I've got a job. And you'll be saying, I'm working on my venture. Yeah, but I'm taking home several €100 a week. What are you taking home? Nothing. Now, I believe that when I look back at the type of jobs that I've had, this is very much about the mentality of an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship being a mentality, an attitude, a way of life, a belief structure that not everyone can do. Okay? It's a state of mind you have to be in. So I know for a fact that I've had jobs where I've been overworked and underpaid. And I've had some jobs where I've been overpaid and underused. I've been underemployed. And underemployment has meant that I've become really depressed. Overwork has sometimes meant that I've got a bit angry about it, but actually sometimes I've been happy in the job to be worked and not paid very well for it. Okay? As an entrepreneur, I think you're worth the effort that you're putting in. And I've never felt more employed. I've never felt more employed because I'm employing myself. And it's up to me whether I'm using my strengths. It's up to me whether I'm working too hard and not getting anything back. It's up to me whether I'm selling myself too cheap and doing stuff that I don't really enjoy. But I can swear to you, from a personal experience, I have never felt more employed. Which means that tomorrow, if you were an entrepreneur, you'd be employed. And no one can say, you're one of the youth unemployed. Okay? It's a state of mind. And one of the worst things about unemployment is it's really hard to get out of the world of unemployment when you've been in it a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. Because it is a state of mind to be unemployed, as well as the reality that there aren't jobs out there for enough people. So I do think that a number of young people will be able to make the leap and say, I just don't want to be unemployed. So I'm going to employ myself in an endeavour that empowers me, drives me forward, and hopefully makes me money. Because I just don't want to get locked into this systemic failure that is youth unemployment and wait for the politicians and the other people to work out what they're going to do about it. I'm young, it's my life, I'm just starting out on it, I want to be employed. Bosh, done. Entrepreneurship, even if it doesn't work. Because on that CV, you don't say I was unemployed for 5 years. You say I was 5 years trying to make this work, or that work, or I was 5 years and I did make it work, or whatever. So again, this is another debt thing. It does draw enormously on everything about. So vacations, they say, become working somewhere else. You know, actually being an entrepreneur and going on holiday is one of the most awkward things because it stops when you're not there. Because this is the point. If you stop, you are unemployed tomorrow. You know, and even if the business is massive, you are so plugged into it that you know that might be it's not tomorrow, but it's what I worked out when I moved on from that first organisation and I ran another one. I could predict the closing day. If everybody just carries on the way they are, this is when we close. So yes, it wasn't tomorrow, but it was not far enough in the future for me to be lazy and complacent. Now, I think that's something that you experience here when people are running businesses, but they aren't entrepreneurs, is they think the business will just keep going. And then they get a shock. So vacations become just working somewhere else. You find that when you're relaxing, you think more about the business than when you aren't working on it. Because when you actually release the pressure, you come up with your best ideas. You solve problems that you weren't able to solve them when you were looking at them. So, you know, if you're in a relationship, for example, or your circle of friends, you just need to be aware that as an entrepreneur, it takes over other aspects of your life. People will say to you, what are you thinking? And you will always be thinking about something, 70% of the time, remember? So it takes over in that regard. And entrepreneurship then becomes something visceral. You feel it in your guts all the way through. It's an amazing form of employment in that regard. And at the back of your mind, you'll always know that if you don't put 100% in, that you'll be unemployed tomorrow. And the weird thing is that's fine. As long as you know that it's only tomorrow, it can always be tomorrow. As long as you work everything you need to do that day. Okay? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Might have to.
After tomorrow you can be again into work.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. That's the other thing. You know, people fail in business, and the best ones, they bounce straight back. Oh, my business has failed. Move on.
I don't know if this even related to the subject, but I always say that I want to work. I want to experience working, just to hate it. Hate it, and then stop working for my own, you know?
Yeah.
Just to have an experience, put it on my CV, you know? I've worked, blah, 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 for I don't know how much. And I was, okay, I tried it. Thank God, that's it. That's what I want to do. And then try to work on my own.
Well, the irony is the economy is at the state where that might be really difficult right now.
Yeah.
So you might have to put that one to one side. So this is what I was saying. It was all about cash. And look how quickly it all went. So in the workbook, I've done lots of various sort of more technical things about working out the cash, but there's a few things that you can take away from today. So the first is that you need to calculate what you really need. And actually you'll find that what you really need is a lot lower than you sometimes think. And you need to calculate what the business needs. Okay? And if you can reduce either of those two, then do it. You need to calculate what you're worth. Okay, so if you have had employment and you believe that it's fairly likely that you could get that job again, then that's fair enough. That's what you were worth. Okay, it's just a benchmark. And if you compare that to where the bare minimum is, you have two poles in the sand. One based on what you absolutely need to live, and the other based on what you're worth in the marketplace. Inflating it much more than that, in the early days at least, is a bit of, you're kind of kidding yourself. Job titles are just titles. Just because you're a chief executive doesn't mean you're worth £100,000. You know, so be very realistic with yourself. If you want to earn £100,000, then build a business that will pay you one. One of the most stark pieces of advice I've given to a lot of CEOs of NGOs is when they've said to me, well, NGOs don't pay good salaries. And I've said, but you're the boss. If you want a better salary, make the organisation capable of paying you one. Why is it everyone else's responsibility? So as an entrepreneur, if you want to earn £100,000 a year, the answer is simple. Design a business that can pay you that. And if you can't, then you're not worth £100,000 a year. Simple. So once you've worked out what the business can afford, and you've worked out then you need to work out the costs associated with your business delivering the value that you want to produce. So these will be direct costs related to what you're going to produce, how you're going to behave, how you're going to actually deliver to the customer. There'll be indirect costs. So these are the costs that go up or down depending on how active you are. You want to reduce those as much as possible because they're the costs that can run away with you. They're the costs that were running away with us. You know? And if they don't add real value, take them out. Now there's a very exciting space coming to Cyprus soon, a co-working space. Okay? Anybody that is considering setting up a business should be considering co-working rather than I need my own office. I need my own desk. I need my own door. I need my own prison cell. Because that's what an office can become. What you need is the bare minimum. You know, I have a computer, a telephone and a notepad, and everything else is in the cloud. I really don't need a desk. I find them very restrictive. I'd rather sit with you guys, I'd rather sit on a beach, I'd rather sit in a bar, or use the co-working space. You know? So there are ways of you massively reducing what's essential. Don't base it on what other people have done. And especially if you're young and you're used to working in a group anyway, think about whether you could run the business like that. You know, whether it's meeting wherever you meet. You know, is it an office environment or is it something more creative?
Creative, please.
Then leave it at that. And if it's costing you nothing, kudos. When you set your budgets forward about how much things are going to cost over the year and how much income you're going to be able to make over the year, cash flow forecasting is basically doing that on a monthly basis, breaking it down into a month. How much is going out this month? How much is coming in this month? If there is a profit, a surplus in that month, great. If there's a gap, that's not necessarily a problem. Because if the profit in your business is going to build up that level of cash that will cover those dips. It's only when you don't have enough left for the dip that you're going to have to say, I need to talk to the bank about an overdraft. I need to put a bit more of my own money in, for example, or I need to take that cost out. Okay? And once you're doing this, you're building up confidence in what's going in and what's going out. And then you're actually getting down to what you really need in the business. Okay? And one of the good principles is to minimize the time that you make your first euro. Not your first 10,000, the first one. Focus on that, because that's how 10,000 is made out of 10,001 euros. If everything you're doing in terms of launching your business is shortening the amount of time before, I'm here, thank you for your euro, your trading and your cash flow forecasting is going to start to work for you. Does that make sense? Yeah. A lot of people seem to put a lot of time in business planning, and they do all this, I'm going to get the office set up, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to market myself. And 6 months later, they've made their first 100 euros, but they've burned about 8,000 euros in already. Shorten that time as much as possible. Okay? And then once you actually know how much money you're looking for, then you can have a conversation about where from. Okay? If it's 150,000 euros and what you're doing touches the buttons of a number of grant funders, then by all means apply for grants, because they're really useful things. They don't have to be paid back. You might have to compromise and deliver the outcomes of the funder, but that might give you some rigour to your business in the early days and enable you to deliver on a promise to someone and learn from that or whatever. If it's less than that sort of money, you might be able to put that in from your own savings. You might be able to borrow from friends and family. You might be able to, if you're onto something very exciting and you've done a lot of the modelling and you've got a good plan, use something like crowdfunding, which tends to work for things from sort of 1,000 euros up to 50,000 euros. You know, and now there are different models where sometimes you only get the money if you get it all, or you can pay a bit more and you get whatever you raise. So there are these options open. But I really think that it's only worth looking at them when you actually know what you need to raise. Because I think looking at them too soon, and a lot of people will hold their hand up and say, I want to know what my funding options are. They end up designing their business for the funding option. And actually maybe going for an EU funding from scratch is not the best way to start your business. You know, maybe starting the business small and building up a partnership and building up a network and making it more collaborative and a joint venture, and then going for the EU venture together is better. I don't know, it depends on your venture. But once you've really worked out what cash you need at any one time, then you can think about it. And also, once you've worked out your processes and actually what you're going to be doing based on your business model, you might then actually get back to a really strange situation of saying, and I'm going to get a part-time job. Because whereas you might think I'm going to be absolutely brain dead if all I'm doing is serving in a bar, I'm worth so much more than that. If that's, no, I'm actually an entrepreneur setting up a business, and actually I'm just going to work 20 hours a week in a bar just to get my mind off the business and earn a couple of €100, it's completely different. Because it's not your main job, it's just a way of bringing money into the business. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think once you've modelled and actually worked out what you really want, then you can be far more creative about where the money comes from. Yes. Okay. Questions?
Where does the money come from?
It can come from all kinds of different sources.
Yeah, I mean, you said crowdfunding and stuff.
There are over 40 international crowdfunding platforms. You know, it's a new phenomenon that people get excited by entrepreneurs, they get excited by innovation, and it's democratized getting involved in investing in business. You don't have to be a millionaire, you just need €1. Yeah. And crowdfunding is a great invention, invented by the fact that funding is getting harder to get hold of. That's incentivized people to say, but surely if we could get millions of people involved, we wouldn't need as much from each person. So crowdfunding is becoming a great way of launching businesses because it's also online. It's also helping you spread the word of what you're doing or that sort of thing. So that is definitely a growing source of startup funding, especially for organisations that might be your size. I've just worked with a guy who wanted to launch a market stall. He needed £1,300. See, he thought he needed loads, but actually he worked out that the cash would come in so quickly, he only needed to cover the initial startup costs and the raw products for a few things and have a bit of a buffer. £1,300 was a really empowering amount for him because he even said, I can put it on a credit card. Because I've seen people launch businesses on a credit card. And he put it on Kickstarter. He did a really good video. He had friends that could do video. They did it for him for free. He had someone that could do business modelling, me. I did that for him. So he didn't even use that, but actually just saying to people, if you want to look at my business model, you can, was enough for people to say, well, most of the people on here don't have one. He actually got about £3,900.
Wow.
So he's actually made more starting up than he has in his first 6 months of trading.
What other alternative sources are there for funding?
There are limited grants, especially depending on what structure you choose. So if you are more of an NGO, you will be able to tap into grants for this, that and the other. There aren't that many grants for starting up things up. That's the thing. You do need to get down to realising that the main source of money for starting up comes from the entrepreneur themselves. So you have a duty to get it down to as minimum amount as possible, because it's likely you should put money in. You know, selling your car might be a lot quicker than working your way around trying to get grants from different places. Friends and family. You know, it's one of the most educational things that you can do, setting up your own business, and they tend to ask the least questions. But most entrepreneurs have exhausted friends and family before they go to a bank.
They're like drug abusers.
Yeah, it is. It's like drug abuse. But bank of mum and dad works. You know, and I have approached my stepmother as well and said, you could help my cash flow if I could just ring fence some of your savings. So it's not a loan, it's just please don't spend it, because I might be on the phone. You know, because they are interested in supporting it. But they're also interested in those costs being as low as possible. So there's grants. I mean, if you have a much bigger project, you know, there is probably more grant funding available for that. But people will look for track record and credibility. So again, it's in your interest to get something small and going so that you've got that credibility, partnerships, that sort of thing. Then there is borrowing. And borrowing, you know, for businesses is based on your forward projection of how much money you're going to make and how robust that is. The main issue with that at the moment is the cost of it is very high. And getting access to it in Cyprus or the UK or anywhere in Europe or America is actually quite difficult at the moment. But there are other movements starting in other parts of Europe where actually what they're saying is small businesses can't borrow. Doesn't mean they haven't got money, it's that they don't want to use the money that they've got because that's their only cash. And the banks won't lend at a reasonable rate. So that's incentivised people in the UK, for example, to facilitate businesses lending a small amount to each other, like another crowdfunding approach. So potentially, again, in Cyprus, if entrepreneurs network well with each other, that could be another source of funding, is actually sharing it with each other on a much smaller scale. So whereas I don't think crowdfunding necessarily would work here yet, because there isn't the throughput, if people network with each other, then potentially small short-term loans between each other might work.
But the thing is, with crowdfunding, you're still in debt. For example, in Kickstarter or Indiegogo, that are on the internet, you give some amount of some money to the campaign, and then you're gonna get something back. Like maybe if they're trying to get a film production, you're gonna get maybe the poster of the film or...
Yeah, this is what I said, you're always in debt somewhere. So this is the system of promises that these things feed on, where you say, you know, if you give me £1,000, I'll give you a signed poster, things like that. So you've got to work, that is in effect the equivalent of interest. It's part of the cost of capital, both in terms of how much time it's going to be. I mean, this guy that I'm talking about spent time producing fresh produce and shipping them all around the world. So it's good in a way that he overshot, because he's now going to have to do this time to say thank you to all the people that actually signed up. So you're absolutely right to hit that. And the different crowdfunding platforms do charge different percentages of your fee. 3 to 7%, something like that. That is cheaper than borrowing the money, but it's still a cost. So you have to know, you have to do your figures accurately. But I think it's difficult to answer where funding should come from unless you know what the business is actually looking for funding for, or what the amount actually is. You can have a very general discussion about the whole world of funding and stuff, but personally, I think that that's quite distracting until you know what the funding is about. And I think maybe on this platform we can actually look at how many people actually develop businesses and actually support them to get funding for the individual businesses, and that will give people a more real example of where the funding comes from.
Yeah, that's really good idea. Thank you.
Okay.